amazing grace of God. It is an invasion of the sovereign love of God, penetrating the gap of darkness with the overwhelming power of His marvelous light. It bridges the gap between man and God. Take a journey through the amazing grace of God with your host, Sarah Abraham, as she shares the compelling stories of those who walked in His covenant and have overcome by the amazing grace of God. Join us weekdays this fall for Amazing Grace with Sarah Abraham.
Welcome to Amazing Grace. We're so delighted you have tuned in to us. From all of us, from Destiny TV, we welcome you. We are sharing the part 2 of the Rama Gerig story with you. In the first segment, we shared about what an amazing student she was, dropped out from high school and then went back. She's on a master's now program and pretty sure she'll be on PhD pretty soon. Then I'll have to say Dr. Rama Gerig. Anyway, Rama, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
And on this segment, I want to talk about the abuse that you have gone through. So take us back. The first time it happened, you were how old?
My first recall of being sexually abused, I was about 4, maybe 5 years old. And so, and I remember when it happened, I felt all sorts of things that I wasn't sure I was supposed to be feeling. And I felt scared, and I felt lonely, and I felt, but also physically, I felt things that I didn't know how to explain, that I was feeling. But to say that I felt violated would be the top of the chart, because it was a family member that was doing that to me. And
you were 4-year-old, so you don't even understand.
I don't even understand. And at that point, it could have just been, the experimentation of an older sibling, but it went on and continued.
So how many years did it go on?
It went on until I was a teenager, actually. And so, and I remember when I was 10 years old and I was coming home from school, and I was going to meet my father for the very first time in the free world. My father had been incarcerated for sexual crimes against women. And I had always thought, for those 10 years, from the time it started, the sexual abuse started with me until that 10-year marker, when my dad gets home, things are going to get better. They're going to get better. The abuse is going to stop. My mom won't have to work 2 jobs. We won't have to live in government projects anymore. We won't be stealing from Peter to pay Paul and never really knowing where our next meal is going to come from and how we're going to survive. And I was walking home from school with my best friend, Judy Smithy, and I told her, I said, if my dad doesn't make things better, I'm going to build a wall around my heart, and then no one will ever be able to hurt me again. And I meant it. And when I met my dad in the free world, I intuitively knew he wouldn't make things better, but I could not have told you he would make things worse, and he did. So what ultimately happened to me as a direct result of the abuse that I endured, and I think that, I've researched it now, so I know that statistically it's an outcome that's not unheard of. It's a common outcome. I was busted for drugs the first time when I was 11 years old. I started a gang. I became a bully. I had very, very bad behavioral problems. I couldn't trust, and I was so angry and so hurting on the inside that I just wanted to hurt other people so that I could stop hurting, and I thought that would be the way to do that. And my punishment when I got busted at 11 was my mom took me to Thomas Avenue Baptist Church. I'll never forget it as long as I live, to be baptized. And I honestly thought that all those people were in this church to watch the bad girl be punished. No one really explained to me that I was going to be cleansed of my sin, or what baptism actually meant, or anything to that effect.
To you, it was a punishment.
To me, it was a punishment. And I thought all those people were there to watch it. And here's why. It wasn't because the church did anything wrong. It was because of what was going on inside of me.
There was something the church could have done.
Probably, and certainly one could argue that. But I think for me, I was so full of shame already, and so full of spectacle of guilt, and just this sense of there's something wrong with me. There's got to be something wrong with me. And so I also got sentenced to guidance center for that particular that particular
Incident.
And I remember I went to guidance counselor, and now I think they call it something else, but back in the 70s it was guidance counselor, and I told the counselor everything that was going on in my household. I mean, I told her
About
everything,
all the abuses,
all of the abuse.
brother,
I
father.
told her everything, and she did nothing. She sent me home. And so the message that gave me then was, this is your lot in life. You have to deal with it. This is, you're on your own.
Nobody's going to help you out of this situation.
Exactly. And one event led to another, and my mother ended up sending me to live with my father in Atlanta, Texas. And that is when things went terribly, terribly worse. They just got a lot worse than they did get better. And he was more of the physical.
Why didn't you mention this to your mom?
At that point, I felt like my mom had so much going on. And I think you have to understand that when you're raised by a single parent who's struggling so hard just to
put food on the table,
just to keep it together on the bare minimum, I felt so responsible for her happiness and so responsible for things falling apart. And I'll tell you the reason I personally felt that way is my father was arrested and convicted of his crimes while my mom was pregnant with me. And my grandmother had told me as a little girl on that if my mother had not gotten pregnant so many times, my father wouldn't have raped those women. And the message that told me, because she was pregnant with me, was it was somehow my fault. And my mom would always say that
sometimes adults don't even think
get what they're saying
and what kind of influence it would have on the children.
And my mom would always say that the happiest years of her life was when she was married to my father. And
I guess that's the reason she's remained married to him when he was in jail for 10 years.
Well, they divorced, and but then they got back together, but then they didn't. And so, but what that made me hear, because she was pregnant with me, and so I wasn't born yet. So the happiest years of her life was when she was married to him.
Oh,
so I really felt like I just came at this really bad time in life, and I messed up everybody's world. And so, and there's a book called The Perfect Victim, and I'll never forget when I read it. I could relate to exactly what that book was talking about. I felt like everything about me was the perfect victim. And the timing of my life, just everything felt like I was always going to be a victim. And it was just the way it was always going to be. And so I already felt so responsible for my mother's unhappiness. And I already felt so responsible for crimes that I didn't commit. And my mom, absolutely, and I need her to know this, she never did anything to make me feel like I was responsible for her happiness.
She was doing her best.
It was inside of me.
From what other people spoke or said.
And so the secret went on for a long time, and then my mother did remarry. She remarried my stepfather when I was 4, and he was incarcerated when I was 6, and
for
assault with a deadly weapon and armed robbery. And then he got back out again when I was he got out just right after my biological father got out. And then my stepfather was, to me, he was my hero, and yet he was not a good role model. He was into drugs and alcohol, and I mean I think he burned our house down for insurance money, and you know, just things that aren't normal, that shouldn't be happening, are happening, and yet it's just the norm in my life. You know, this is just normal stuff. And he was murdered when I was 16. And I think that's probably, for me, that was a real defining moment for me, of when I just boiled over and said, no more, I'm done. I am so done with all of this, and I am done with being a part of this family. I'm over it, and I'm leaving. And I did, and that's when I really started drinking really heavily, and I got very involved in.
So you were 16. That's when you left school.
That's when I left school.
Dropped out of school and started
And I
Being
started
close to your best
drinking.
friend, alcohol.
Yeah, and I got into violent relationships.
Oh,
There was a
the
lot
cycle
of
repeats, huh?
yeah, and it just, you know, I didn't understand that that I was just becoming a statistic, and that I really didn't understand that there was any way I'd ever be able to change any of this. And when I was 18, I kind of started feeling like maybe I needed to make some changes, and I got a good job, and I went to work for a property investment company, and I excelled. I was just doing really well with this company in sales, and just they moved me to Dallas, and I had this great opportunity, but then alcohol got in the way of that, and I couldn't, and I was so afraid to let people in, and I was afraid that once people got to know me and who I really was, they wouldn't accept me. And I thought I could move away from my problems, and I think a lot of people think if you make a geographical change, you
yes.
just get away, it's going to change, and that.
Changing a zip code would change it, huh?
Yeah, and it didn't, because everywhere I went, I was there.
Your problems followed you.
And exactly, and I think so for me, when I got pregnant with my daughter, that was a defining moment for me. I knew the doctors had told me I couldn't get pregnant because of different things that had happened to me. I remember I'd gone to a party once when I was 15, and I'm going to tell this because there are so many different moving parts to what can happen to girls like me that go through the things I went through. And I had been slipped a Mickey, and I was taken advantage of at that party, and it caused things to go terribly wrong for me. And so I was told I couldn't get pregnant, and so when the doctors told me I had conceived this beautiful baby, I was just like, okay, that's it. My life is going to be totally different now. It's on, and I didn't know.
This baby's father was in your life?
No, he was not. And but I didn't know that alcohol was an addiction, and it wasn't something that I could just walk away from anytime I wanted to. Although I did. I was able to control it and manage it, and do some things outside of drinking. Like when I was pregnant, I didn't drink. And I was able to drink just at parties for a long time. But after a while, I think the darkness of the demons just get louder and louder over time. And then by the time she was 18 months, that's when the doctors diagnosed me with MS and gave me that 4 years. And when that happened to me, I put together I had mapped out my whole childhood as being just this colossal joke. It was just almost cruel and unusual punishment to live that kind of a life, and then to be told you've got 4 years to get your affairs in order, and you got this 18-month-old beautiful baby, and I just I was so devastated, and I was so hurt that suicide seemed like the really good option for me. And I remember thinking that there was no way that there could be a God that I'd heard the churches talk about, and I'd heard people talk about, that could bring this little girl and take me away.
And leave her to this cruel world.
And leave her to the same people that
did all this cruel, horrible things to you.
And so I thought, if there is a God, I'm going to pray right now to let me get her till she's 18, and then I don't care what happens to me. And that's exactly what I did. I just wheeled myself through the next 18 years. And when my daughter graduated from high school and started college, I overdosed. And
See, that demon never leaves.
It never left. It never left. And so at 41 years old, my life had completely fallen apart. And all the things that I thought I had let go of, or thought I had neatly tucked away or drowned it in alcohol or other things, floated to the surface. And so I had to get some real serious insight on how to get rid of these things that were poisoning me. And for me, and people always, I get asked this question a lot about how do you really forgive? I have a lady that I'm working with right now, and I'm helping go through some things, and she was also sexually abused, and she said, how do you forgive your abuser?
Tell me, how?
And I think, to me, the way I did it was, first I had to accept that we're all human beings. We're all human beings, and we're all children of God. and that God doesn't give us.
So the abuser and the abusee, we are all children of God.
We're all
Okay.
children of God, and
And
in
what
the
is the next
end,
step?
the next step is I had to do some things that I didn't want to do. I had to. So I said this in the first part of this interview. I had to go and ask my daughter for some forgiveness. You know, granted, in comparison to my childhood, my daughter's childhood was nothing like mine, but it was her childhood. It was her pain. And pain is subjective and contextual. And so my daughter's pain for her was as bad as my pain was for me, because it was pain she had never known before. And I had to go back and ask her for forgiveness. And I can't ask, and it's kind of like when I put food on my daughter's plate when she was growing up, and she'd say, "Oh, I don't like that, Mommy, I don't like that." I said, "So you have to try it before you can tell me you don't like it, and then you can tell me you don't like it." I have to try and show my daughter what forgiveness looks like before I can ask for it. So I had to start letting go of some of the things and forgiving some of the people. Because it's circular. It's all connected. We're all connected. And now I have two beautiful granddaughters, and I want them to see that no matter what happens in life, God loves us, He forgives us, and we are His hands and feet, and He lives in us. And so you take the body, and the mind will follow. You know, you take the body, and the heart will follow. And
So did you make the first contact
I did. I absolutely.
with your dad
I made
or
the
your
first
brother?
contact with my dad first.
Your dad first.
And because to me, I had to work from that way down. And I'll never forget when I was going to the prison to see my dad. I just wasn't feeling very spiritual. Of course, all I was listening to was Christian music. And so I stopped at a Starbucks, and I paid for someone's coffee, and I had to go through a couple of pay tolls, and I paid for the people behind me their tolls, just thinking, reap it, reap it, reap it, just reap it, and I will sow it, reap it, and I will sow it, and I know that it will happen. And I'll never forget when my dad walked around the corner, and I was sitting in the prison yard, and I just felt okay. I felt okay. I knew that I was going to be okay no matter what. And I sat down and I said, I'm here because I want to hear your story. I want to know what it was like for you growing up. What kind of childhood did you have? Who are you? And I want to tell you mine. And that's what we did. We just exchanged. I talked to him like a human being, and he confessed things to me that no child should ever hear their father confess, but I did. And I was able to say to him.
How were you able to handle that? Hearing it for the first time.
For the first time, it was, I mean, honestly, physically, I wanted to just be sick. But emotionally, I knew I needed to just be there. I needed to hear it. I needed to see it. And I was trusting in God, and I was praying with God. And look, there are little things that I did. Like when I got in the car, I said, "Okay, God, let's go." When I got out of the car, I said, "Okay, God, let's go." When I went through the gates, I said, "Okay, God, let's go," because I knew I needed God to be with me.
See, that is called relationship.
Exactly. And I had learned how to have this dialogue with God and taking Him everywhere I go. And people talk about, you got to have a personal relationship with God. Well, how do you do that?
That's
no
the way you do
told
it.
me. And
that's the way you do it.
And so, yes. And so, and when I sat down at that table, I said, "Okay, God, let's sit down. Let's invite this in. Let's hear Him." And the whole time, in my thoughtful prayers were, "Give me your eyes to see with, and your ears to hear with, and your mouth to speak with,
and your heart,
your heart to love with." Because of my own, I want to kill this man. I don't, I want to wring his neck. I don't want to sit across the table from him with dignity and grace and listen to what he has to say. But I did.
Rama, you are an embodiment of dignity and grace.
Thank you.
You are.
Thank you. And when he asked me to pray with him, and we held hands, and I was able to pray with him, and I was able to ask that God, just come in and help. And I heard my dad ask Jesus into his heart, ask God into his life, and ask for forgiveness. I remember thinking, this is so fake. He doesn't mean it. He doesn't mean this at all. But then immediately I thought, who cares? You know it's real, and you know you mean it, and you know you're here for the right reasons.
The right reason.
You're not here to judge whether or not this man really means what he's saying. because
between him and his God.
It's between him and God. Your side of the road is clean now, and you can walk away. And I did, and my skin wasn't crawling.
That day, you got out of prison.
I got out of prison that day, and that is something that most people don't realize is I had this man-made prison that had been around me my whole life. It prevented me from having relationships with people healthy. It prevented me from being honest with people, and it prevented me from being what God always intended me to be. And so I think to me it's just about going through the steps of what if you wanted him to come to you and ask you for forgiveness, what would that look like, right?
Right.
So if I wanted my dad to come to me and ask me, what would that look like? And that's what I wanted, for him just to ask me, tell me what your story is, and then listen.
How was it with your brother?
With my brother, there was a lot of crying because my brother and I love each other, and we both came from the same brokenness, and so there was a lot more to it than that. But to be able to sit with my brother and just tell him I'm okay and you're okay, and God loves you no matter what, and I love you no matter what, was the truth that I had wanted to say for years but couldn't say. And to be able to do that with him before he left the world meant the world to me.
How was his life?
He was an addict. His life was very, very, very
hard,
broken. Very
so
broken.
Drug and alcohol?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And in fact, that's, again, not very uncommon.
So not a good family relationship, no children?
He had 2 children and grandchildren that he never met. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's, he met both of his sons, but hadn't seen them since they were toddlers. And that's the sadness that can come from all of this. And so we've had to learn how to heal one day at a time. And that's the way I do that. It's just to do it one day at a time, one step at a time, one kind act at a time. And I think if we can just
Even
learn.
with your brother, you made the first move?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, and I had to ask my sister for forgiveness and my mother for forgiveness and do some healing with my family. But we've learned to heal together because we broke together, so we have to heal together. And somehow I thought healing would look different for me. I thought it would be away from all of that, but
kind of brought you together.
It brought us together.
Brought
Absolutely.
you together. And you need each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't do it without the support of my family. I couldn't.
Tell me a little bit about this Society of Forgotten
Society's
Children.
Forgotten Children is an organization that we do 5K runs once a year. We raise money for scholarships for children whose parents have been incarcerated. This year we'll be doing it on February the 20th at Tom Bass Park at 8 o'clock.
February 20th at Tom Bass
Park.
That's in Pearland.
That's in Pearland,
yes,
at 8 o'clock in the morning. Rain or shine, you can sign up there. And all the proceeds will go to Scholar Chips, which is an organization that gives 3 $10,000 scholarships each year to children of incarcerated parents. So,
all in Texas?
We raise the funds here in Texas out of University of St. Thomas, and she is in Virginia and kind of works from downward.
So does the scholarship what we raise here goes to Texas children, or does it go all over U.S.?
It goes all over.
All over
Mm-hmm.
U.S.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. I really think that you need to work with the prison where your father was incarcerated.
Yeah.
You know, somehow,
Yeah.
somewhere.
I think so. That's not a bad idea.
Because that's where your father spent most of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And there probably are many, many parents there whose children would need a little bit help.
I did some prison ministry too for a little while so that I could no longer judge the men in white before I could approach my dad, and that was another thing I did do, and absolutely and thoroughly enjoyed that. Carrying the message to inmates. You find God in the strangest places that you just don't think you don't think to look, and He's in those jail cells, and He's there. He's with us all, and so yeah.
Rama, thank you for sharing this inspiring empowering and encouraging story with us.
Thank you. Thanks
I
for
am
having me.
really blessed, and I believe you've been blessed. Last 30 minutes was one of the most important story that you heard in your life. I don't know what you are going through, but you're watching us. And if you are one of those offenders, if you are a man who is violating your children or violating other children, I can only talk about what you have heard today, what it does to a child. As an adult, as a family member, you are supposed to protect them, love them, and take care of them and give them that confidence that I will protect you from outside people who will come and try to destroy you or hurt you. But if you are that person and then you violate that child, you heard what it does. Makes them drop out of school, makes them feel violated, makes them feel alone, and then turn to alcohol and drugs, suicidal thoughts. When Rama overdosed, she could have been a statistics, all because of your action. Please think. Those enemy will put those kind of thoughts in your mind. But please think about what is the consequence of your actions. And please walk away from a situation like that. And if you are a person who's been violated, there is hope. There is hope. It is not your fault. You are not the reason any of those things happen to you. You are a precious child of God. And look at this beautiful woman today. If God can do that to Rama, God can do that to you. And remember, amazing grace of God is all that you need. Thank you so much. God bless you.